Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the Statesmanship Project. Right now, in my leisure time, I like to read short stories by Robert E. Howard, and he wrote Conan the Barbarian. It wasn't one story, it was multiple stories, short stories. And so it's fun to read these short little stories. They're like 3 or 4 chapters. I imagine some of them are longer. But he wrote them back in I believe around 1920s. And so it's fun to see a different perspective of the world because in a person's writing, they are going to convey ideas that they have about the world in which they live as they project it into the world that they are creating. And so for something like this, Conan takes place probably sometime. It's not really actually clear when it takes place, if it's like BC, AD, any type of that type of framework, because you have characters that are in chainmail and armor, and then you also have Conan, who's a barbarian, who is mostly in a loincloth. And so there's not a lot of real indication of what the time frame is or what the morality is of the people in the stories in terms of like religion, I should say. The morality of the characters is fairly well explicated. Conan is very honest and very direct with who and what he is. Most of the time he's a thief. Sometimes he's a conqueror. He always kicks ass. But the point I want to raise, and this comes up frequently in the stories, is the idea that because he is a barbarian, because he's outside of society, his wits are sharper, his word is truer, his instincts are better, his reflexes are sharper, and he's stronger and more durable than the person or people who live within society. Whatever civilization he might be in, whatever city he's in, or whatever civilization he's encountering. Of course, it's all fantasy, so there's no real distinction of like the world in which he lives in. It's not like he's traveling through Europe or something like that. It's a fantasy world. And so as a character, he's uncivilized, but he's often more polite and more honorable than the, quote, civilized characters. And he's not deceived by other characters in the story. And of course, this is a common theme that comes up in all of the stories, is that he is better able at whatever the task is because he's not part of civilization. So there's a scene where someone insults him, and a moment later he kills the guy because he insulted him. But the point is that Conan, who's not part of civilization, comes from a world where insults are not tolerated. But the man who is part of civilization deals with and lives in a world in which insults, unkindness, rudeness is tolerated, because physical violence, retaliation in that way, is not accepted, is not readily tolerated. And so this is an observable critique on society. It's that because we're quote-unquote civilized, you have to tolerate people who insult you, because bashing their brains in for the insult is unacceptable. And we see this largely on the internet, far worse than it would ever be in real life. Even in a civilized world, people will insult you violently and harshly on the internet because all they have to do is type words into a keyboard. The likelihood that you find out who they are is pretty much slim to none. And the likelihood that they would say these things to you in real life is pretty much non-existent, because you would punch them in the face if they said these things to you. And so that's one of the critiques. And it's neat to see, and I think C.S. Lewis talked about it as well. And it's one of the flaws of certainly of the modern world in which we live in, but in civilization in general, the idea that you can get away with being rude to other people because the person to whom you are rude has no real manner of recourse against you for your rudeness. It used to be that insults towards your character would be challenged with a duel, and then dueling was made illegal. And so slights against people's character were thus tolerated. Another element that is discussed in the stories is the idea that Conan's wits are sharper. So anytime someone tries to lie to him or deceive him, he sees through it more clearly because he doesn't live in a world where people accept clearly false things in order to cooperate with the society at large. And this is something else that we see, especially with our modern world, in order to, quote unquote, get along with everybody else in society, we have to accept more and more absurd falsehoods. These include accepting someone's pronouns, going along with their delusions that they're actually a woman when they're clearly a man, thinking that women and men are the same, allowing people to insult Jesus. These are things that should not be tolerated, and these are clear falsehoods that should be called out. And you don't do anybody a real service if you go along with their mental delusion. Someone who thinks that they are, a man who thinks he's a woman or a woman who thinks she's a man is clearly doing herself a disservice to both her physical and mental health and to longevity long term, as well as their ability to achieve their ultimate end, which resides in heaven. And so by not telling them the truth, you're not doing them a service. You are doing them a great disservice, especially if you go along with their delusion. And so if we truly love our neighbor, we must always tell them the truth, even if it's harsh. Doesn't mean we have to be mean about it. We can be very kind and polite about it, but we don't have to tolerate their illusions. We just have to kindly explain why they are wrong. And so some of the other things that Conan is better at, of course, he's more physically domineering than just about anybody else in the story, but that's part of the story. And he's also faster, like his reflexes are keener. And this comes from living in the wild, essentially. And so what I want to point out or discuss or bring to your attention is the idea that there's this dichotomy. And I think it's a false dichotomy between living in a civilization, in a society, and becoming soft and weak-minded and weak-willed, and living out on the edge of civilization on your own, independent of everybody else, solely dependent on yourself for your survival, and being tough as nails, sharp as a sword. Your wits are sharp, your mind is keen, your body is strong, and you don't rely on anybody else for anything because you don't have to. And I think this is a false dichotomy, because I think most people in society right now are very isolated. And, as much as they depend upon the system for themselves, they don't recognize the degree to which they are integrated into the society. But more importantly than that, I don't think you have to, in order to live in a successful and flourishing civilization, you have to give up the very things that make you a strong, durable, sharp-witted, honest person. So your strength, your durability, your cunning of mind and reason are not things that I think you should have to sacrifice in order to live within a society, within a civilization. These are the things that should be the backbone of your civilization. If you want to have a truly strong and flourishing civilization, you must always deal with people in truth. And that is the biggest, I think, misunderstanding about what the lie is that they want to try to sell you. It's that if you want to live in truth, you can't be part of society. And so you have to go live outside of society. When in reality, society should be about finding the truth and perpetuating the truth and continuing the truth with all people, wherever you are. And then your society will flourish. And that's what we want to achieve, is finding truth in all that we do and in all of our relationships. And be that barbarian who doesn't compromise on the truth in everything we do. And that is how we will save our society. That is how we will save our civilization. And that is how we can build a new civilization if it comes down to it. It is on the truth. So I will leave you with that to ponder the truth. And I hope that you have enjoyed this content. And until next time, have a good day.